So Will Huxley of the Huxleys. I feel like this is a talk show. This is great. So I love to ask people, when I start, like when people say to you, what do you do? What do you tell them?
Nowadays I say that I'm an artist. And it's exciting to say that. It's like, for a long time I worked doing art and film stuff for other people, but now I'm just working for myself and with my partner. And it's saying you're an artist it's kind of...
You're legit.
Yeah, that's actually what I'm doing. I make my living from being an artist, and it's taken me a long time to get to that, where that is the one thing that I do. I've had to do a lot of horrible things along the way.
And we'll get to that, because, you and I know each other from being schlubs on film sets, working for free because it was a uni expectation in film school, which is amazing, and we learned so much and we wouldn't change it for a minute. But ultimately, there has been a really long journey where now you are no longer subsidizing your income alongside a creative practice. You're just doing the thing. Yeah. So you live in the dream.
Yeah. Well, you're my oldest friend in Melbourne as well. You're one of the first people I met when I moved here.
What do you mean?
That 2 years ago.
Yeah, totally. When we met at a uni 2 years ago. No, so that was 2004 that we met.
Yeah.
And that was my first year of film school.
Yeah.
And the journey that's taken you from... Because I remember when we finished film school, I think I finished in 2006. Were you around the same?
I finished 2004.
And you went to the VCA.
Yeah.
And I went to RMIT, and we both only really thought we were going to work in film.
Yeah.
And neither of us actually work in the film industry at the moment.
Yeah.
But I think we're sort of happier than we would have been if we had gotten what we wanted.
Yeah. Well, I came out of film school super amped and thinking I'm going to be a director, because that's how the VCA experience works. There's a lot of ego there, which is weird. There's a lot of bad.
But you've got to have that. Otherwise, I think if you didn't believe that you were going to be a star, a star director, or a successful producer or cinematographer, I don't think you'd put up with how many hurdles there are to getting through the process.
The Australian film industry is such a difficult and such a competitive world, and so few films get made, and there's a real style of film that seems to work successfully in Australia. So I felt like the kind of stories that I wanted to make were not easily going to be made. And I remember my graduating film, which you were actually in, one of the women said that this performance of one of the female characters is terrible. It's straight out of a John Waters film. And to me, that was like the best compliment. But that's not the kind. They want realism, and they want gritty urban drama, and it's just not my thing. So I kind of struggled with that. And then I went out of film school and found it hard to get work in the industry, but ended up working in television. And TV is so different, and all my ambitions were crushed very quickly as a production assistant at the ABC, carrying tapes around. But I gradually worked my way up at the ABC to doing something I liked more. But it was always working for someone else, and it never fully fulfilled what I was interested in doing. And what was the final straw for me was actually working in commercial television, and that's when I realized that just any desire to make films that I had kind of felt burned out by the commercial television experience. I was like, this is so far from the creative notion that I had as being a filmmaker. So it was just that was, for me, I was like, I can't do this. I remember working on a show for Bunnings, and I was literally watching paint dry. Seriously, filming paint dry.
Not metaphorically, no, but literally.
And filming instructional videos on how to remove grout from tiles. It was so depressing that it was actually kind of liberating. I was like, this is it. And that was my last job in TV. And, I worked on The Real Housewives of Melbourne with a whole bunch of assholes, and Dancing with the Stars, and all these kind of just soul destroying, where everything that you do creatively doesn't seem to make a difference because it's a formula and you have to follow exactly. I didn't feel like any of my weird ideas or my effort that I would put in would actually come out on screens.
And speaking of weird ideas, for those who you've said that you're an artist, and I have a strong idea of what that looks like, but for those that don't know, when someone does ask you to elaborate on what sort of artist you are, what do you say?
Well, predominantly, I work with Garett, who's my partner, and we're the Huxleys. That just kind of happened. People started calling us that, and when we started collaborating with our art form, we're predominantly a photographer and a video artist, but I've always had a real keen interest in costume, and I used to do production design, so I was always interested in that world. But Garett comes from a fine art kind of, he makes costumes and he does some of his own photography as well. So we just combined those skills and helped each other, and then it really, something happened. There was this spark, and we helped each other achieve bigger ideas than we might have done on our own, and it just took off from there. So we mainly start with like a visual art first. So we'll make a costume for a photo or a video work, and then people started asking us to bring that to life on stage, in festivals and galleries, and it just kind of took off, and a lot of people call us performance artists, but that was sort of not the first point. But it became that way. So we sort of saturate the market, really. We like to do performance, costume, video, photography, installation, anything that we can, really, as visual as possible.
I love the idea that it grew organically, because if you had tried to set out to be a performance artist, that is such an overwhelming concept, and all of the layers that needed to be in place for some of the more later discoveries of your output, the idea of jumping straight to that might have been so overwhelming and therefore impossible.
Yeah.
You almost needed to incrementally just go with what you were most fascinated by or most turned on by at that time, and then continually adding layers, because once seeing what the final product is, I'm not surprised that you got to that, because as long as I've known you, which is 14 years now, you've always had a flair for performance, and there's always been a dark, comedic, twisted comedy to whatever you love and get turned on by and are excited by. And also, I mean, the space that we're sitting in now is your apartment, and I'll probably try and publish some of the Vogue living images of the apartment alongside this podcast to give, or even just take some, because it's such a beautiful space. But every time you've lived in a space, it has completely come to life with your inspirations. You know, it's almost like a bowerbird style collection of everything that your books and posters and shell art. And
I guess I'm a maximalist. There was a quote from Vivienne Westwood where she says minimalism is for people without taste. I like the idea I love to be surrounded by things that influence me and inspire me, and be it like colors or images or plants or I just take a stimulus is really important to me, and that's where I take a lot of inspiration from our artwork, is from other artwork or fashion or photography or masks or anything. I can find inspiration, and that's why I like the house is so busy. But also moving into a depressing 90s apartment was really brutal, and I was like, how are we going to offset having to live in this place and just fill it with as much things as we love, and then it doesn't feel like you're in an apartment that has no design. You know, like I'd love to live in an architecturally glorious place, but in Melbourne it's unaffordable. So that's the trade-off.
It makes sense to me that you're filling, you know, my creative hero is Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way, and she talks so much about filling the well in terms of in order to be able to draw on your creativity, you need to infuse it and inspire it and nurture it and nourish it. And if you are constantly surrounded by your inspiration points, you're not buying a Matisse print and thinking, oh, I'm going to use that as inspiration in work. You're just thinking, oh, I like it and I want it in my space. But then inevitably shape and form and color and texture does infuse your work. So if you're surrounded by your inspirations all the time, it's not surprising that you make work that's colourful.
It permeates into your life in some ways, like you're not intentionally. But what I thought was really interesting, what you said about us, like if we said, I want to be a performance artist, you're right, it never would have worked. I feel like we just made work things that we were excited by and wanted to create, and it's sort of snowballed at each step along the way to get where we are now. I never would have believed myself if I'd said like 6 years ago that this is what I'd be doing. I thought I would still have to be working in television for people that John Waters, another one of my heroes, said that success is never having to work for assholes. And that is, at the moment, I'm just working. Garett can be an asshole, but I can be an asshole too. but we don't have to work for other assholes. We're the only assholes that we work for.
And like, this is my rule of dating. As long as I'm the most high maintenance person at the table in the relationship, then I'm okay.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to date anyone that's more high maintenance than I am.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with Garett. He's less maintenance than I am. So,
he's a succulent.
It works, yeah. And it works together. Like, it's really nice to have someone that you trust to work with.
Well, let's talk about that period between finishing school, finishing uni, 2004 it was for you. How long would you say that you've been able to be only relying on your craft and art as your sole source of income?
So, I mean, I was quite lucky in the sense that I left film school and I went into the industry, and not a lot of people get to do that, but it wasn't necessarily doing what I really want. I started as a production assistant, which was just a lot of organizing. I'm terrible at that kind of stuff, but I had to get good at it. I had this really mannish, deranged boss called Dione, who was I was terrified of, but also inspired by.
She's actually one of the biggest listeners of this show. So
I ended up loving her, but she was so tough, and she'd just make you realize that you were at the very bottom. And that was kind of what TV is like. There's a real hierarchy, which I don't really like. But I worked up to being a researcher, and then I ended up being a producer, working predominantly in arts TV, which was the best of TV that I could find, because I was still surrounded by making stories about musicians and artists, photographers, fashion. So yeah, I was surrounded by creative people, and being a creative person myself, that was where I was most comfortable. But the ABC often you lose your job. I've lost my job there. Like, I've worked there on and off 3 or 4 times, and every time I get fired. Not for being bad, but just because the ABC has budget cuts.
Yeah.
And so you never feel comfortable there. And then I ended up working in commercial television. So I worked for Channel 7 and Channel 9 and Channel 10. I worked on a show called Everybody Dance Now that got axed within the first month, which was fantastic. I was so happy to lose that job because it was horrible. But yeah, I found the commercial TV the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It was so not creative. And it's full of young people that want to make money, that love the idea of working in television, but they're not actually really creative people. A lot of them are like travelers or people from
gypsy folk.
I work with a lot of English people that just come here and they work really hard, and I admire that, but they're not. I never really found anyone in that industry that I felt was a true creative filmmaker. And I feel there's a big disconnect with television, especially reality TV. It's so far removed from film for me. And everyone pretends that they're making something inspiring and creative, but inevitably it's got to make money, and it's commercial, and it's about exploiting people.
Well, it's a lot easier to sleep at night if you are someone who exists in that space and doesn't aspire creatively to more, because it's such disconnect there that unfortunately it won't change because of that reason. But it's also not going to attract people who do want to do groundbreaking work, because it's a sausage factory. The only way those shows exist and can continue to, because also when a show returns for a second season, rarely do they say, well, let's give it a bigger budget and see what we can allow for creatively to imbue the next season. They go, as a matter of fact, we did it for $400,000 this time around. Let's see if we can do it for $350, and what can we shave off next time around to make it a much more streamlined machine because of the learnings from last season. So I think that, in general, it's probably not the space that you're going to find. I mean, where do filmmakers who want to, for people who are listening who really want to exist in the film industry or want to create narrative that exists on TV or in cinema, have you found that friends of yours from film school have gravitated towards certain careers before they managed to be directors in the film industry? It's
interesting, and it's actually quite sad, but the people that I went to VCA with that are successful are men, predominantly really, really driven, really competitive, and they're all white men, and and they've done really well. But I knew at the time that they were really driven, and you have to be. And I'm not that confident, so I couldn't sell myself the way that they can. And, they're obviously talented as well, but the Australian film industry is predominantly a lot of male directors, and sadly, and I think that's changing, and I'm really hopeful. But yeah, to get your story, you have to be really, really driven, and really, you have to sell yourself and be out there constantly pushing to get funding, and it's so hard, and I just found it overwhelming. But there are other roles, and I know people that have gone into cinematography, or they work as gaffers or lighting assistants, or there's a lot of craft roles. But for me, that I wanted to be something more ridiculous and bigger, and I didn't want to have to be setting up a light. Or I like production design, because that I could see my work and I could see it visually. But yeah, I just found that he worked really hard on the film industry, and not always do you get the glory of having your work seen, because you're one of those people behind the scenes, unless you're lucky enough to be a director, or and that's tough, and it's particularly in Australia. But it is possible, I think, and there are lots of rules coming into play that are trying to encourage and support women.
And lots of people of different nationality backgrounds, and
That's so important, because when I was at VCI, I did feel like it was a boys' school, like
and a heterosexual white male school. Yeah. It's not even like
the gay people that were there were closeted,
totally,
including myself. So it's it is a tough. But I'm hopeful that Australian film industry, there have been booms in the past. Like in the 90s, there was a boom. In the 70s, two of my favourite films I love Picnic at Hanging Rock and Muriel's Wedding, and they're both Australian. And I have hope that there is,
another golden age of Australian cinema.
Yeah, I'm sure that Australian films are always, like, they're well made, even if I don't like them. Yes. Like, I often think that, there's a craft. There just seem to be a lot of serious, angsty, realist dramas about crime in this country, and it never appeals to me. I feel like films like Animal Kingdom and The Boys, they're great, but they're also dark and all very masculine, romper stopper, all those kind of...
Yeah, but also even then you're referring to films that are 10 to 20 years old. In terms of, the most recent version of the film in that genre that came out in the last year or two would be maybe Cut Snake, or, there's just so many... examples of films that subscribe to genres that have been successful before. But then what do you expect a film industry to do when there are so few successes, rather than, if it was America, they'd only be banking on what's worked before in order to make something that's going to hopefully work again. But I would say to anyone who wants to exist in a narrative space that we've come through so many, like a decade or two of disappointment about opportunities dwindling. I think if you want to make narrative, it's actually a better time than ever before, because of the opportunities through content and online as being something that you can use, even if it's not going to be the end game. Why not spend 5 to 10 years honing your voice in a narrative space?
Yeah, I think there is, and I also feel like the way to make things has changed. It doesn't have to be that high end. The technology has become more available for more people at an affordable kind of, and you can make something without having a huge budget. You can get a DSLR camera that shoots beautiful video.
You can use your phone.
Yeah, there are ways, like there's a film called Tangerine that was
was shot on phone.
And it's an incredible film. Something like that inspires me. That. When I came out of film school, I was like, oh, it's so expensive to shoot on film, because we shot on 16mm, and I just thought, things have changed, and perhaps now, if I was coming out of film school, I might be able to pursue some of my weirder film ideas. But I find that I've come to a place now where I'm using a lot of my skills that I made as a filmmaker and a photographer, and I'm using them in a completely new way. And I'm so excited that that wasn't a waste. For a while, I was like, I spent all these years studying, and I'm just working in commercial TV. But now I'm using it in a way that I love.
But I think that's something that's so valid about that, because, if we flash back 10 years, you and I would have both been finding ways to be filmmakers. We only would have seen directing feature film as being the number one aim, because of and our actual skill set is different enough that what we've both come to is separate to each other. But the reason why we thought we wanted to do the same job is because when you're coming up as a kid, you look at all the jobs that are on offer and you relate to cinema more than anything else. And you know that the job that you think that you want to do most, it would be to be the writer and director of that experience, because you're good at authoring ideas and you have something to express, and there is a performative element to that as well. If you're encouraging actors to find their performance through the work. So it makes sense that you'd look at opportunities as a teenager and think, well, being a film director makes sense.
I think that I wanted to be in front of the camera mainly, but I was too hammy. I think I was too big for film. And so I thought, maybe I should be behind the camera. But I did originally want to be an actor when I was a kid. And then I went to Whopper in Perth to start studying. And I found actors so intense. And it was so... it was too much. I kind of recoiled from it. Thought, I can't be this loud and this out. And it kind of threw me. I was like, this world is too much for me. And I've gravitated back towards being behind the camera and just being the author of stuff. But I always had that performance bug. And I think it's amazing that all these years later, so, almost 20 years later from when I wanted to be an actor, I'm now using performance skills again that I never thought that I would. And being a performer is a big part of what we do now. And it's a weird, I've kind of come full circle but picked up a whole lot of different skills on the way.
You also, I feel like that energy doesn't go away. It just finds a new way to realize itself. So you've got a natural ability towards expressing yourself in that way that made you think, I want to be an actor. But actually, a big part of being a successful working actor in this day and age is to be malleable and invisible in some ways, and emotionally available to be able to have huge emotional experiences, at the drop of a hat. And a good actor is all those things who can work and be a jobbing performer in that space. I love the idea of being an actor too, but I'm not necessarily any of those things. But yet, when I need to be performative, I can really do that.
Yeah.
Because I also related to the idea of being an actor. So I think it's really interesting for people to question why they think they want to do the job that they want to do. Because maybe the solution is not what you think it is, because you just haven't discovered the best use of your skills, because maybe that job doesn't exist yet. Everything that you do, I don't know of many artists that create work like you and Garett. And so 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 5 years ago, it would have been impossible to steer yourself in that direction specifically because the job didn't exist.
I didn't think that it was possible to make a living doing what we do, but it has been so far. One of the things that I was really key was the beginning of last year. I finished up at the ABC, and I was really scared because I was like, I'd been busy working as a performer and as a visual artist with Garett, but I still had the ABC work to subsidize a lot of that. And I was like, this job's coming to an end and I've got no other job, and I really didn't want to have to look for work in TV. And I was like, I'm just going to try and jump off the deep end and say, this is going to be my sole income, and I'm going to try and make this work without having to do another job that I didn't really want to do. And because I made that decision, it was almost like I had to focus so intently on what I loved doing that I made it work, and work started to come in, and the more effort you put into it, more people will appreciate it, and things started to roll in, and I didn't need to get another job last year, and I'm hoping that it's going to be the same. But I think sometimes you have to take that risk and just say, I'm not going to, if I really want to do this, then I have to take a risk and say, because if I took a job in film, I wouldn't have had time to make the photography work that we made and do the performances and costumes and stuff. That would have suffered, and then you would only be doing it half, So it was like, and a good friend of mine, Sally Ross, who's a beautiful painter who I admire a lot, she says, until you give up doing the things you don't want to do and focus heavily on the things you really love, they'll never fully take over and it will never fully blossom for you. And I think, and to some extent, that's true. And I think if there's something that you really want to do and you love so much, if you put everything you can into it, even if it doesn't work, you have to try that. Otherwise, you'll regret it. Malcolm McLaren said it's better to be a spectacular failure than a benign success. And I love that. Like, if you just go at it hard, and it might, hopefully it'll work. And if it doesn't, at least you tried. That was kind of a thing for me.
Also, if nothing's wasted, you know, say for example you were to put all your eggs in the basket of making your dreams a reality.
Yeah.
At the end of that experience, if you didn't manage to solely exist on an income that you were satisfied with, doing the thing that you love, how, as far as deathbed reflections of your life goes, I dare say that 6 months or that 12 months that or that 3 months that you dedicated your life to the thing that you love most in the world, surely that is worth something.
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing I've learned is that doing what I love, there are still times when I'm not super, like if I'm not super busy, there are people from the previous world that I existed in that asked me to do things. So this year I did a couple of freelance stories for the ABC, and I made some video art for some other friends who are, you know, I still use those skills, and I pick and choose rather than having to do it all the time. And it actually is more pleasurable because I'm not forced to do it all the time. I can say, oh, I've got time to make this, and it's nice to use those skills when you want to, rather than having to do it. Sometimes when you do what you think that you wanted to do originally as a full-time work, it becomes not as fun anymore. And I found that with working in television, that being a filmmaker, it wasn't as close to what I imagined. Doing it full-time in that way just kind of took all the fun out of it.
Yeah, for me, I actually found that I didn't need much in order to be really happy in my work life day to day. There were quite simplistic things. Once I was designing, I work for myself now, and in that process of going from working for someone else to working for myself, I thought the only way I was going to be happy was to work on projects that were in line with, you know, that were really cool, that were like totally in line with everything that I would make if I had a total clean slate to choose what I wanted to work from. But I realized that for me the most important thing was just being able to choose who I work with, and what the music that's being played in the room is, and how hot the room is, and how bright the room is. And you know, like simple things that on the daily used to get me down because I was in like a dark room with no natural light and terrible music or no music and, you know, assholes. And once I got a chance to just design the space in which I existed, I was so happy that I could be making anything, really. And at the end of the day, like having a nice day-to-day experience was less about the output and more about the process for me. In terms of what you've learnt through working for other people that you applied to a solo practice or an independent creative practice, in that 10-year gap between finishing film school and then starting to do work that looks like what you and Garett do now, and even once there was some overlap and you were working for them and for yourself simultaneously, do you now apply skills to do with the running of your own business or your own art practice that you can see came from other professional experiences that you had previously?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the skills I learnt working at the ABC, I apply to things that I do now. So, you know, I worked with some cameramen and I learned stuff about lighting, and I learned stuff about cameras and lenses and stuff like that, which were really helpful. But I also, I worked with some really smart people. So I worked for a while with Virginia Trioli, and she taught me a lot about interviewing people, and I did all her research for her interviews. So she was really exacting, but I found her fascinating. And I also loved that she's very smart and very like strong and intense woman, but she's also a real dag, and she loves George Michael, and she has this kind of like, she loves bad taste as much as good taste, and I love that. And that's another thing. We both worked together on this John Waters interview, and I got to meet him and she interviewed him, and he said to her that to appreciate bad taste and to love bad taste, you have to have good taste first. And we both really enjoyed that. But I loved working with intelligent, strong women. I think that was a thing that I really took. And also people along the way pushed me to, in commercial television, to hide aspects of myself. And I learned along the way to reject that. And what I do now is fully immersed. Like every ridiculous impulse I have creatively and visually is to explore that. And I learned to do the opposite from working in commercial TV. I felt like a quiet kind of person, and that's never been who I am. But I felt like I had to tone myself down and this, yeah, so I did learn that. But, there are things, like if I have to go back, sometimes I do work for the ABC still, and all the skills I learned as a documentary maker are really valuable to me. So, this year I was asked to do a story on the Australian Ballet for them, and I just switched back into the stuff that I learned about interviewing and shaping stories. And a lot of the stuff I've learned between film school and now, sort of non-fiction. I made a lot of documentary work, but I really tried to pursue stuff that still attracted me, so a lot of art content.
Well, you've also been in the professional space for long enough that when you're left to your own devices to have a solo creative practice, you know what a workday looks like, and you know how your productivity works best, what time of day you should be waking up. And talk to me about how you structure your days when you are working on something just for yourself.
You have to, I have to be disciplined, otherwise working for yourself, that's a problem. Like, you can't, if you're not disciplined, I have to get up and I have to go somewhere and do it. So I tried for a while. Garett and I worked from home, and it became overwhelming having all our work around us, and there was no space, and it's great to go somewhere and make work. So we have a studio in Collingwood where I edit and where we film. We've got a green screen in there and all our costumes, and it's a place that you go to work and then you come home, and home is just somewhere to relax and unwind, and you don't bring all that stuff with you. I think that's really important, even if it's a hot desk or somewhere where you feel that you're working away from, otherwise there's a tendency, I could just lie on the couch and listen to a record or masturbate.
Yes. Procrastinate.
You can get too comfortable being at home. So it's I think it's good to have a place of work. And if I've got a deadline, I work really well under pressure because I have to get it done. I'm not a person who starts things early, which has always been a problem for me. But I do work well when there is a deadline, and I snap into this mode where I have to get this done. I've just been working with Sarah Ward for her show at the Art Centre, which opens in a couple of weeks, and it was an intense period of editing and filming, and their whole show is visual art, which I've made for them, and I really had to be really disciplined and get into the studio and start editing and just and work almost as though I was working in for Project Runway when I worked for them, or for one of those big you have to put in those same kind of hours. But there is a big difference. I find that I feel sometimes like I feel a little bit more burnt out some days working for myself than I did when I worked only because it doesn't always shut off. So what Garett and I do, we come home and we're still thinking about it. And we're like, well, what are we going to do for this performance? And we've got to make those costumes. What are our ideas? Whereas sometimes when you work for someone else, you can go home and you think, I filmed that, I did that. It's a weird thing. Working for yourself, it does sometimes take more mental.
The stakes are higher.
Yeah, you care more because it's you out there, just you, and you're not. When I was working for Channel 7, I didn't I worked hard, but I wasn't invested in it because I didn't really appreciate the outcome. But when you're invested in your own practice and it's your name and your work out there that you love, you're always thinking about it and you really care about it, and you want it to be really good. So their stakes are higher, and that is one thing that I think freelancers, they do work they work crazy hours, and you never know when your next job's going to come. So sometimes we say yes to so many things that we're just so busy because we're scared that if we don't say yes, we might not have money to live on. So you do have these really intense periods, but I think it balances out because you love what you're doing. So even if you are tired and run down from it, you have a lot to look at and be proud of.
Yeah, I know this. We're used to the idea of working 50 hours a week for someone else, and then when you do work for yourself, it ends up being 90 hours a week, for better or worse. On the one hand, you can contribute that much energy because your name is in the mix, your heart and soul are on the line. That is the thing that ultimately gets you out of bed early and allows you to stay awake and go the extra mile on the daily. But then the flip side of that is you are more burnt out because you can't compartmentalize it, because you've got too much skin in the game sometimes.
We've had to learn to make sure that we say, oh, we're not doing anything for this period, and have a break. So like we just had like a week off, which was, we said no to a couple of gigs around Christmas, just because we needed that space, like, to recharge.
Really successful artists that I've encountered who are further along in their career are very fiercely protective of their time, and they also seem to not budge when it comes to no amount of money would make them reconsider, unless they did the math and worked out it would buy them some creative freedom elsewhere.
You have to make, it's taken us a long time to be able to say no to stuff, because you're scared and you're trying to build yourself up and get work coming in. But you have to, my ideal is to get to a point where I only say yes to the things I really, really want to do. So we love doing stuff for like galleries and arts festivals and all those things that are aligned with, but we also do corporate gigs as well, where we perform at parties and events, and they're not always as fun and the people aren't always as responsive, but they pay really well, and so you still, even within this world that we've been creative, that we love doing, there are still jobs in there that you're just doing it for the money.
Well, also, there's always some compromise of some kind. And I also wonder whether if you got to a stage where you only had to work on things that you really loved, and you no longer had to find the money jobs within the work that you love, whether that would breed another mentality that might mean that you would be more complacent, or there's always something to keep you hungry, I think. And at the point at which that goes away, then I think sometimes your output or your desires or your goals start to change, because maybe it all becomes too easy, or maybe you then go, well, we've never made a feature film before, maybe we should try and do that, and then you have to set yourself a new set of intentions. I was actually thinking about that just recently, because at any stage in any creative person's life, in anyone's life, there's always the thing that they're working towards, and the moment they get there, how long do they sit in satisfaction for before they set themselves a new set of goals to look further up the mountain and work out where they want to climb next? So that you always, I think if you get the thing that you want, all you're going to do is restructure your goals so that you want something bigger and better.
Well, I feel that we're always getting sometimes we get complacent with some of the costumes we've made, or some of the performance we want, like, how do we make this bigger or better or weirder? We're always trying to, we get bored of doing the same thing. So I'm always trying to do something more outrageous or more challenging. And I think that's important, to keep challenging yourself in that way.
A big part of the work is the fact that you're quite invisible when performing. Even if we're seeing your face, we're seeing a heavily made up version of your face, and sometimes you're completely concealed. Is there some part of that that facilitates a greater level of performance, because it's not you, it's this other being?
For me, that is, my performance desires are always inspired by not being me, being something other than me, like an escape. And fantasy's always been a big thing for me. So creating this alter ego in a way with costumes and makeup, it's like a mask, and it enables me to be more free. And Garett as well is actually a very reserved person and quite shy. So wearing costumes that conceal your identity gives you a freedom to be bigger and weirder. And it also takes, a lot of our costumes are about taking away gender, because I think that there's a freedom in that. And it often really challenges people. They're like, are you a chick or a dude? And just a lot of straight men are really confronted by that concept. And I want to encourage people to say, who cares what gender you are? This is, just take on this visual escape, this beauty, this weirdness, and enjoy it. Things don't have to be so prescriptive. but the costuming and on all that is an escape, and it is a way of realizing your fantasy. And I want to give to people out there to see something they think, wow, it takes them away from everyday life. And that's always been, all the art that I love pretty much does that in some way or another. I love things that are an escape, and that's what I want to create as an artist, to give magic or beauty or weirdness.
I love the idea that you can gravitate towards modes of escapism to such a degree that your truth is connecting to the creation of escapism. Yeah. You know, if you, I have got friends who are so enamored with the art or the output that they love to consume as a mode of escape, and I think, is too much of a good thing bad? Should they ultimately be finding a way to connect it to something authentic? But I love that by the time you see it all the way through, if you were to pursue your creative appetites to such a degree and to consume so much of it that you can start to make it yourself and to make something important that feels so authentic and true to who you are, that your greatest truth is escapism.
Yeah. And another thing for me that has been really big in my life is that I spent, the first half of my life fighting the fact that I was queer. Or not fighting it, but just not being, growing up in an environment where it was not encouraged and no one ever talked about, like being in Perth in the 80s and the early 90s. It was my school years were terrible, and I had a really hard time with it. And I think because of that, I was very closeted. I was always flamboyant, and people probably always thought that I think they thought I was gay, but I struggled with that for a long time. And so I feel like after I came out, I've spent the other half of my years making up for that lost time.
Once that dam burst.
And being as queer as possible, and making up for all the people that put me down when I was a kid for being queer, and now celebrating it and making it the thing that's my success rather than what was keeping me back. And and now I want to put that in a lot of my artwork, because I want queer visibility, and I want it to be fun and celebrated and loud, and not be hiding, because it's awful not being yourself. And I had a beautiful girlfriend that I loved for a long, and that was one of the hardest parts of my life, was having to end that, because to be who I was. It was a really hard time in my life, but she understood, because we loved each other, and we had to say goodbye to each other in that way for me to go off and do this, and we're still great friends now, and I feel like she's proud of me, that I've made that part of my life that I was afraid of, the thing that's my success. It's like I keep quoting people, but John Waters, another thing that he said was that find the thing in society that people is your weakness, that people put you down for, and amplify it, and you'll win in the end. So it's like being a weird, queer, like freaky kid. I've now amplified that by 100 in my artwork, and I'm succeeding, and I'm winning from doing that. And that was the thing about Divine and all these characters that in his films, where they are weirdos, but they're so successful because they're to themselves to the 10th degree.
I love the idea that you have been gravitating towards this. You've always had heroes that exist in this space, and you've always had icons that exist in this space. I mean, all of your homes have been covered in the work of people who are the Divines of the world and the John Waters of the world, that have been wearing their weirdness on their sleeve. And yet, at a few stages throughout that journey, you might have been lost or wondering what your output was or what your platform should be.
Yeah.
And yet you always been gravitating towards it. You just needed to collect enough information or inspiration to join the dots, so that then you could then find your own version of that to express through the work.
And you've got to keep putting it out there, I think, as well. Like, I feel like one of the things is you can't wait for other people to give you the appreciation or the
permission.
Yeah, you can't wait for them to say, "Oh, this is great." Then keep doing it. Otherwise, you'll be waiting forever. You just have to do what you love and put it out there, and eventually people catch up. And then once they've caught up, you've already made a whole lot of... Didn't Andy Warhol say that as well? He said, don't wait for people to tell you your art's great. Just keep making it, and by the time they catch up with you, you would have made 100 more paintings.
Well, also, I'm interested in the idea that you meeting Garett and you both coming from different disciplines. I love the notion of creative couples, and I interviewed a photographer couple earlier on in this podcast series, Tom and Kate. She'd come from a law background, he came from a photography background, but her law practice, she ended up becoming a photographer, and they both work side by side. Her awareness around entertainment law gave them the structure through which to turn their passion into a really thriving business. That cross-pollination was so necessary for them to both level up in their artistry. And I'm interested in the fact that, Garett has a photography background, yours was film, you were both making work that, there's a really even split in what the Huxleys do, that is his skill set and your skill set. And I don't think people necessarily need to have a romantic partner come into their lives to facilitate that. I think if we look around, we can always find creative collaborators to facilitate better work for ourselves.
Yeah, you find someone that complements you, or someone who believes in you, in your work, and it's great to have someone that you can learn from and they can learn from you. There has to be an exchange in some way. I don't think it has to be romantic. In some ways, that it then becomes more complicated. But the good thing is that Garett and I were partners for many years before we fully started working together. So we got to a stable part of our romantic life. So then adding the artistic part of it was okay. But I don't. Yeah, I've always thought that we're lucky that we love each other and we have that romantic and creative. But you can just find someone else. Doesn't have to be a romantic partner. Just someone that will be there, back you, and make work with you and appreciate what you do. It's great to have that, and I feel like I've taught him a lot of stuff as well. So I'm always inspired by his work, and his costume making is like I'll come up with an idea, and I'll be trying to think of ways to make it, and he will find a way for us to make it. Or he'll come up with a great idea and bring that weird prototype in, and we're like, this is so crazy, how are we going to see in this? But it's inspiring and it's funny. We always, like, if we're not laughing, it doesn't really appeal to us. I think humor is a huge part of what we do. And I also like you're talking about me having inspirations. They're like, someone like you and I both have always loved Madonna.
Oh, don't even get me started.
And there's one thing that I always take from her is she I remember her saying once when I was a kid, I saw an interview with her, and she's saying, I'm not the best dancer, I'm not the best singer, and that doesn't matter. I'm giving everything. I'm putting my heart and soul into this, and I'm playing with all sorts of things, but I'm not the best at any of them. But it doesn't stop me, and that like love to create something. I'm not a great dancer or singer, but we sing and dance in our acts, and I don't care that I try really hard, and I think that passion for it comes through. And I never trained as a dancer or a musician or a singer or anything like that, but I love doing it, and that's the thing and I love watching people who are not necessarily the best at their skill, but they give it, and I love performers that give everything, and that inspires me.
It's about guts.
Yeah.
Like when I think about, I'm exactly aligned with the Madonna school of being an entertainer or being an artist. The Madonna's philosophy when it comes to her art, and it is if you wanted the best singer, well, there are plenty of opera singers, where that came from, or plenty of pop stars, Mariah before she busted her voice, could have been someone, Ariana is the answer these days. But it's not about skill necessarily, because I almost find God-given talent to be a bit boring. I would much rather have guts and authorship and determination to tell a story in spite of all those things.
Some of my favourite performers or singers are people that not necessarily... Someone like Leonard Cohen, for example, or Lou
Tom
Reed.
Waits, the Husk,
Iggy Pop. Like, none of them are like great natural singers, but they have this character and this the drive and energy and enthusiasm for what they do.
But also,
comes through.
Somewhere between the singing of the note, there's always a point in the voice when you're talking about singers, and every art form, whether it be photography or ceramics or film directing, there is the technique, and through the technique you see the humanity. And I think that's what people want. And I know that when you consume your work, the Huxleys' work, I was just thinking now and talking to you about the idea of growing up in a oppressive, heteronormative, white, Perthy environment. The idea of the fuck you to the establishment that lights the fire underneath you, that allows you to go into a space that is a bit more conservative, and to flip people's minds out so that they feel almost like they're being accosted by
an assault.
It's an assault of queer,
we
energy.
call ourselves gay terrorists. And as you say that fuck you, one of the things we did last year, which was probably one of the most fun performance works we've done, was when the plebiscite happened on the results day, we were asked by an organisation called -18, which is a charity for young LGBTIQ kids, to perform at the Old Bar in Fitzroy. And we made this performance to Carmina Burana, the classical composition. We wrote it, changed all the lyrics to fuck you, so it's fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, and it was to repeat it over and over. And we made a video work, and we
I saw it. I watched it on repeat.
And it was for me it was so cathartic to say fuck you to all the people in my life that had teased me and said and called me a pervert or a weirdo or for being queer, and saying, and also for judging me. Like, last year was the first year living in Melbourne that I had people in Fitzroy yell out like homophobic statements, and it was because of the plebiscite, and it was because people were given the right to pass judgment on your lifestyle. So that was so that performance was about that, but it was also about all the years growing up in Perth, feeling vulnerable and feeling like you'd been picked on for who you were. So that was so nice, and that on the night of that we did it, we were so lucky that the results were yes, but our performance didn't matter if it was yes or no, because it was still fuck you for putting us through this in the first place.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it was people were singing along, and it was just like, but it was silly as well. Like, the work was silly, but taken very seriously. Like, we made it really seriously, even though it was a ridiculous thing. And I love when something is silly but presented with real professionalism and real seriousness.
Polish.
Yeah. I feel like silliness that's mastered in a way is really great.
Well, I love to wrap up by asking my guest, if I was to check in with you in a year's time, is there a project that you would like to have completed that is currently just a glimmer in your eye, or something that you're working on? What is the next year going to be all about for the Huxleys?
Well, for the last couple of years, we've been wanting to fully realise and finish a project that we started, which is our fictitious glam rock band, which is called SOS, which stands for Style Over Substance, which was a project that we did where we created a glam rock band, and we performed on a big stage with video work and pyrotechnics and dances, but with no music. And it was a silent performance, but with everything that goes along with a normal rock show. And we're wanting to produce an album pressed on vinyl with beautiful artwork. We've made costumes for it, and it's going to be, a beautiful piece of art. And we want to work with a sound artist who's going to create the idea of what nothing sounds like, but very beautiful. So it's like, the concept of listening to nothing, but it is something. It's created. It's sort of like in a way, the way that Brian Eno makes ambient music, but asking a sound artist to create the sound of nothing. And so the record will have songs that we've written the titles for and that we imagine in our head, but it's going to be nothing. There will be no sound, but you'll hear something. but along with this vinyl, we want to do a series of large scale photographic works of like our band portraits, But there'll be beautiful kind of that tie in with each song. So every song will have a theme, and there'll be an image for it. And you'll get this with the vinyl. It'll come with all the imagery. And we want to do an exhibition and have an opening where we perform, and everyone can buy the vinyl. And just we want to kind of put to bed that in a final, beautiful way, that concept. And we just need to secure some funding, because to make it as great as we want, it's hard to keep funding those things yourself. So we hope to make that this year, and we've got a gallery interested in showing that work. So that'll be that for me. If that happens this year, I'll be so excited.
Well, there are some high rollers that listen to this podcast, and I'm sure you'll be inundated.
I hope so. And also, we just want to keep upping the ridiculousness. We would just want to make. My ultimate goal is to either represent Australia at the Venice Biennale or Eurovision. So
either or. Jessica Mauboy better take a seat.
I know. I'm like, why do we have to be like all our Eurovision entrants? They're not bad, but they don't embrace the camp, outrageous, spectacular that I love about Eurovision.
And also, I'm sorry, but there's nothing that's come out of Azerbaijan that's any more bizarre than a Huxley's experience.
Yeah. I even was hoping that, I remember that I spoke to Client Liaison, and they were in the running to do it, and they would have been fantastic.
Stunning.
So I just feel like, if I don't get to Venice Biennale, I'll take Eurovision. But if the Venice Biennale ever happens, that would be amazing. Full gondola experience.
Rolling around like Madonna's like a virgin.
Yes.
I've wanted to do this conversation since I began the podcast, and I'm so glad that we got a chance to do it. So thank you so much.
It was like coffee talk.
Like coffee talk with Linda Richmond. But also the fact that we get all that we do, since we've known each other for so long now, that the language that I have around creative process is something that has come into existence through conversations that you and I would have around creative inspiration and creative process and how to design your day in a really pragmatic way. So this podcast exists because of our friendship, so I thought it was very only fitting that we got a chance to talk about it. So
I can't think of anyone I'd rather talk to about this kind of stuff.
So thank you, and I put me down for a vinyl. I'm there. I also feel like in the future, when we look back at who is making work of the 2000 teens, you guys are up there. If it is worth people paying attention, because it is going to be some of the more important work that's coming through Australia in this time. So it's essential.